Virtue, Latin, virtus, ancient Greek, arete is moral excellence. A virtue is a positive trait or quality deemed to be morally good, and thus is valued as a foundation of principle and good moral being. Personal virtues are characteristics valued as promoting collective and individual greatness. The opposite of virtue is vice. Classical antiquity. Platonic virtue. This section does not cite any references or sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. July 2010. The 4 classic Western cardinal virtues are temperance, S. Rosin; prudence, Francis; courage, Andrea; justice, D. Chaosin. This enumeration is traced to Greek philosophy, and was listed by Plato in addition to piety, Hogietes. It is likely that Plato believed that virtue was, in fact, a single thing, and that this enumeration was created by others in order to better define virtue. In Protagoras and Meno, he states that the separate virtues can't exist independently, and offers as evidence the contradictions of acting with wisdom, prudence, yet in an unjust way, or acting with bravery, fortitude, yet without knowing this, prudence. Aristotelian virtue. In his work Nicomache on Ethics, Aristotle defined a virtue as a point between a deficiency and an excess of a trait. The point of greatest virtue lies not in the exact middle, but at a golden mean, sometimes closer to one extreme than the other. However, the virtuous action is not simply the mean, mathematically speaking, between two opposite extremes. As Aristotle says in the Nicomache on Ethics, at the right times, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way, is the intermediate and best condition, and this is proper to virtue. This is not simply splitting the difference between two extremes. For example, generosity is a virtue that fits between the two extremes of miserliness and being profligate. Generosity the perfect between the two errors, it is hitting right on the target. Further examples include courage as the golden mean between cowardice and foolhardiness, and confidence the golden mean between self-deprecation and vanity. To find a golden mean requires common sense smarts, not necessarily high intelligence. In Aristotle's sense, virtue is excellence at being human, a skill that helps a person survive, thrive, form meaningful relationships, and find happiness. Learning virtue is usually difficult at first, but becomes easier with practice over time, until it becomes a habit. Prudence and virtue. Seneca, the Roman Stoic, said that perfect prudence is indistinguishable from perfect virtue. Thus, in considering all consequences, a prudent person would act in the same way as a virtuous person. The same rationale was expressed by Plato in Meno, when he wrote that people only act in ways that they perceive will bring the maximum good. It is the lack of wisdom that results in the making of a bad choice instead of a prudent one. In this way, wisdom is the central part of virtue. Plato realized that, because virtue was synonymous with wisdom, it could be taught, a possibility he had earlier discounted. He then added correct belief as an alternative to knowledge, proposing that knowledge is merely correct belief that has been thought through and tethered. Religious traditions. Judaism. Virtues fighting vices. Stained glass window, 14th century, in the Niederhasloch Church. Loving God and obeying His laws, in particular the 10 Commandments, are central to Jewish conceptions of virtue. Wisdom is also celebrated in the Book of Wisdom. A classic articulation of the Golden Rule came from the 1st century Rabbi Hillel the Elder. Renowned in the Jewish tradition as a sage and a scholar, he is associated with the development of the Mishnah and the Talmud, and, as such, one of the most important figures in Jewish history. Asked for a summary of the Jewish religion in the most concise terms, Hillel replied, reputedly while standing on one leg, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." That is the whole Torah. The rest is the explanation. Go and learn. Christianity. In Christianity, the 3 theological virtues are faith, hope, and love, a list which comes from 1 Corinthians 13:13. Pistis, faith, Elpis, hope, agape, love. The same chapter describes love as the greatest of the three, and further defines love as patient, kind, not envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude. The Christian virtue of love is sometimes called charity, and at other times a Greek word agape is used to contrast the love of God and the love of humankind from other types of love such as friendship or physical affection. The Bible mentions additional virtues, such as in the fruit of the Holy Spirit, found in Galatians 5:22-23. By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is benevolent love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, benevolence, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is absolutely no law against such a thing. Islam. In Islam, the Quran is believed to be the literal word of God, and the definitive description of virtue. The Prophet Muhammad, as the messenger of God, is considered the best example of virtue in human form. The hadiths, his reported sayings, are central to the Islamic understanding of virtue. Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, moral duty, has pivotal virtues that everyone keeping their dharma is asked to follow, for they are distinct qualities of mankind that allow one to be in the mode of goodness. There are three modes of material nature, guna, as described in the Vedas and other Hindu scriptures: sattva, goodness; maintenance, stillness; intelligence, rajas; passion, creation, energy, activity; and tamas, ignorance, restraint, inertia, destruction. Every person harbors a mixture of these modes in varying degrees. A person in the mode of sattva has that mode in prominence in his nature, which he obtains by following the virtues of the Dharma. Buddhism. Buddhist practice as outlined in the Noble Eightfold Path can be regarded as a progressive list of virtues. Right view, realizing the Four Noble Truths, Samyak Vyama, Samm, Vyama. Right mindfulness, mental ability to see things for what they are with clear consciousness, Samyak Smt, Samm, Sati. Right concentration, wholesome one-pointedness of mind, Samyak Samdhi, Samm, Samdhi. Buddhism's four Brahmavihara, divine states, can be more properly regarded as virtues in their European sense. They are Metta/Maitri, loving kindness towards all; the hope that a person will be well. Loving kindness is the wish that all sentient beings, without any exception, be happy. Compassion, the hope that a person's sufferings will diminish. Compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Mudita, altruistic joy in the accomplishments of a person, oneself or other. Sympathetic joy, the wholesome attitude of rejoicing in the happiness and virtues of all sentient beings. Upekha/upeksha, equanimity, or learning to accept both loss and gain, praise and blame, success and failure with detachment, equally, for oneself and for others. Equanimity means not to distinguish between friend, enemy, or stranger, but to regard every sentient being as equal. It is a clear-minded, tranquil state of mind, not being overpowered by delusions, mental dullness, or agitation. There are also the paramitas, perfections. In Theravada Buddhism's canonical Buddhavamsa, the 10 perfections, Dasa Paramayo, are original terms in Pali. Dna Parami, generosity, giving of oneself. Sla Parami, virtue, morality, proper conduct. Nekkhamma Parami, renunciation. Pan Parami, transcendental wisdom, insight. Virya, also spelled Briya, Parami, energy, diligence, vigor, effort. Kranti Parami, patience, tolerance, forbearance, acceptance, endurance. Sakha Parami, truthfulness, honesty. Adhyana, Advathana, Parami, determination, resolution. Mek Parami, loving kindness. Upekha, also spelled Upekha, Parami, equanimity, serenity. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Lotus Sutra, Saddharmapanduraka, lists the 6 perfections as original terms in Sanskrit. Dna Paramita, generosity, giving of oneself, in Chinese. La Paramita, virtue, morality, discipline, proper conduct. Kti, Kshanti, Paramita, patience, tolerance, forbearance, acceptance, endurance. Vrya paramita energy, diligence, vigor, effort, perseverance. Dna paramita one-pointed concentration, contemplation. Prahan paramita wisdom, insight. In the 10 stages, days of Yumika Sutra, 4 more paramitas are listed. 7. Upya paramita, skillful means. 8. Pradhana, pranadhana, paramita, vow, resolution, aspiration, determination. 9. Bala paramita, spiritual power. 10. Jnana paramita, knowledge. Baha'i faith. In the Baha'i faith, virtues are direct spiritual qualities that the human soul possesses, inherited from God Himself. The development and manifestation of these virtues is the theme of the hidden words of Baha'i law and are discussed in great detail as the underpinnings of a divinely inspired society by Abdu'l-Baha. In such texts as The Secret of Divine Civilization. Egyptian religion. Mut or Mayat, thought to have been pronounced Armu. At also spelled empty or Mayat, was the ancient Egyptian concept of truth, balance, order, law, morality, and justice. Mut was also personified as a goddess regulating the stars, seasons, and the actions of both mortals and the deities, who set the order of the universe from chaos at the moment of creation. Her ideological counterpart was Isfet. In Chinese philosophy, virtue translated from Chinese day is also an important concept in Chinese philosophy, particularly Taoism. Chinese, Pinyin, day, Wade Giles, T.E., originally meant normative virtue in the sense of personal character, inner strength, integrity, but semantically changed to moral virtue, kindness, morality. Note the semantic parallel for English virtue, with an archaic meaning of inner potency, divine power as in by virtue of, and a modern one of moral excellence, goodness. Confucian moral manifestations of virtue include Ren, humanity xiao, filial piety, and Li, proper behavior, performance of rituals. In Confucianism, the notion of Ren, according to Simon Leys, means humanity and goodness. Ren originally had the archaic meaning in the Confucian book of poems of virility, but progressively took on shades of ethical meaning. On the origins and transformations of this concept see Lin Yusheng. The evolution of the pre-Confucian meaning of Zhen, and the Confucian concept of moral autonomy, Monumentos Erica, vol.31, 1974-75. The Taoist concept of day, however, is more subtle, pertaining to the virtue or ability that an individual realizes by following the Tao, the way. One important normative value in much of Chinese thinking is that one's social status should result from the amount of virtue that one demonstrates, rather than from one's birth. In the Analects, Confucius explains it as follows: he who exercises government by means of his virtue may be compared to the North Polar Star, which keeps its place, and all the stars turn towards it. Samurai virtue. In Hagakure, the quintessential book of the samurai, Yamamoto Tsunedomo encapsulates his views on virtue in the 4 vows he makes daily. Never to be outdone in the way of the samurai or bushido. To be of good use to the master. To be filial to my parents. To manifest great compassion and act for the sake of man. Tsunetomo goes on to say, if one dedicates these 4 vows to the gods and Buddhas every morning, he will have the strength of 2 men, and never slip backward. One must edge forward like the inchworm, bit by bit. The gods and Buddhas, too, first started with a vow. The Bushido code is typified by 7 virtues circumflex. Rectitude, Gi. Courage, Yuu. Benevolence, Jin. Respect, Rei. Honesty, Sei. Honor, Yo. Loyalty, Chuu. Others that are sometimes added to these: filial piety, K. Wisdom, Kai. Care for the aged, Tei. Philosopher's views. René Descartes. For the rationalist philosopher René Descartes, virtue consists in the correct reasoning. that should guide our actions. Men should seek the sovereign good. That Descartes, following Zeno, identifies with virtue, as this produces a solid blessedness or pleasure. For Epicurus the sovereign good was pleasure, and Descartes says that in fact this is not in contradiction with Zeno's teaching. Because virtue produces a spiritual pleasure, that is better than bodily pleasure. Regarding Aristotle's opinion that happiness depends on the goods of fortune, Descartes does not deny that these goods contribute to happiness, but remarks that they are in great proportion outside one's own control, whereas one's mind is under one's complete control. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, in his observations on the feeling of the beautiful and sublime, expresses true virtue as different from what commonly is known about this moral trait. In Kant's view, to be good-hearted, benevolent and sympathetic is not regarded as true virtue. The only aspect that makes a human truly virtuous is to behave in accordance with moral principles. Kant presents an example for more clarification. Suppose that you come across a needy person in the street. If your sympathy leads you to help that person, your response does not illustrate your virtue. In this example, since you do not afford helping all needy ones, you have behaved unjustly, and it is out of the domain of principles and true virtue. Kant applies the approach of four temperaments to distinguish truly virtuous people. According to Kant, among all people with diverse temperaments, a person with melancholy frame of mind is the most virtuous, whose thoughts, words, and deeds are on the basis of principles. Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche's view of virtue is based on the idea of an order of rank among people. For Nietzsche, the virtues of the strong are seen as vices by the weak and slavish. Thus Nietzsche's virtue ethics is based on his distinction between master morality and slave morality. Nietzsche promotes the virtues of those he calls higher men people, like Goethe and Beethoven. The virtues he praises in them are their creative powers, the men of great creativity - the really great men according to my understanding. WP 957. According to Nietzsche, these higher types are solitary, pursue a unifying project, revere themselves, and are healthy and life-affirming. Because mixing with the herd makes one base, the higher type strives instinctively for a citadel and a secrecy, where he is saved from the crowd, the many, the great majority. BGE 26. The higher type also instinctively seeks heavier responsibilities. WP 944, in the form of an organizing idea for their life, which drives them to artistic and creative work, and gives them psychological health and strength. The fact that the higher types are healthy for Nietzsche does not refer to physical health as much as a psychological resilience and fortitude. Finally, a higher type affirms life because he is willing to accept the eternal return of his life, and affirm this forever and unconditionally. In the last section of Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche outlines his thoughts on the noble virtues, and places solitude as one of the highest virtues. And keep control over your four virtues: courage, insight, sympathy, solitude. Because solitude is a virtue for us, since it is a sublime inclination and impulse to cleanliness which shows that contact between people, society inevitably makes things unclean. Somewhere, sometime, every community makes people base. BGE 284. Nietzsche also sees truthfulness as a virtue. Genuine honesty, assuming that this is our virtue, and we cannot get rid of it. We free spirits, well then, we will want to work on it with all the love and malice at our disposal, and not get tired of perfecting ourselves in our virtue, the only one we have left. May its glory come to rest like a gilded, blue evening glow of mockery over this aging culture, and its dull and dismal seriousness. Beyond Good and Evil 227. Benjamin Franklin. These are the virtues that Benjamin Franklin used to develop what he called moral perfection. He had a checklist in a notebook to measure each day how he lived up to his virtues. They became known through Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. Temperance, eat not to dullness. Drink not to elevation. Silence, speak not, but what may benefit others, or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Order, let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution, resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Frugality, make no expense but to do good to others, or yourself, i.e. waste nothing. Industry, lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Sincerity, use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and, if you speak, speak accordingly. Justice, wrong none, by doing injuries, or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Moderation, avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Cleanliness, tolerate no uncleanness in body, clothes, or habitation. Tranquility, be not disturbed at trifles, or at accidents common or unavoidable. Chastity, rarely use venery, but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own, or another's peace or reputation. Humility, imitate Jesus and Socrates. Virtues as emotions. Mark Jackson in his book Emotion and Psyche puts forward a new development of the virtues. He identifies the virtues as what he calls the good emotions, the first group consisting of love, kindness, joy, faith, awe, and pity is good. These virtues differ from older accounts of the virtues, because they are not character traits expressed by action, but emotions that are to be felt and developed by feeling, not acting. In objectivism, Ayn Rand held that in her morality, the morality of reason, is contained in a single axiom: existence exists, and a single choice, to live. All values and virtues proceed from these. To live, man must hold three fundamental values that one develops and achieves in life: reason, purpose, and self-esteem. A value is that which one acts to gain and or keep, and the virtuous are the actions by which one gains and or keeps it. The primary virtue in objectivist ethics is rationality, which, as Rand meant it, is the recognition and acceptance of reason as one's only source of knowledge, one's only judge of values, and one's only guide to action. These values are achieved by passionate and consistent action, and the virtues are the policies for achieving those fundamental values. Ayn Rand describes 7 virtues: rationality, productiveness, pride, independence, integrity, honesty, and justice. The first 3 represent the 3 primary virtues that correspond to the 3 fundamental values, whereas the final 4 are derived from the virtue of rationality. She claims that virtue is not an end in itself, that virtue is not its own reward, nor sacrificial fodder for the reward of evil, that life is the reward of virtue and happiness is the goal and the reward of life. Man has a single basic choice, to think or not, and that is the gauge of his virtue. Moral perfection is an unbreached rationality, not the degree of your intelligence, but the full and relentless use of your mind, not the extent of your knowledge, but the acceptance of reason as an absolute. In modern psychology, Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman, 2 leading researchers in positive psychology, recognizing the deficiency inherent in psychology's tendency to focus on dysfunction rather than on what makes a healthy and stable personality, set out to develop a list of character strengths and virtues. After 3 years of study, 24 traits, classified into 6 broad areas of virtue, were identified, having a surprising amount of similarity across cultures and strongly indicating a historical and cross-cultural convergence. These 6 categories of virtue are courage, justice, humanity, temperance, transcendence, and wisdom. Some psychologists suggest that these virtues are adequately grouped into fewer categories. For example, the same 24 traits have been grouped into simply cognitive strengths, temperance strengths, and social strengths. Vice as opposite. This section does not cite any references or sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. July 2010. The opposite of a virtue is a vice. Vice is a habitual, repeated practice of wrongdoing. One way of organizing the vices is as the corruption of the virtues. As Aristotle noted, however, the virtues can have several opposites. Virtues can be considered a mean between two extremes, as the Latin maxim dictates, and medio stat virtus. In the center lies virtue. For instance, both cowardice and rashness are opposites of courage. Contrary to prudence are both overcaution and insufficient caution. The opposites of humility are shame and pride. A more modern virtue, tolerance, can be considered a mean between the two extremes of narrow-mindedness on the one hand, and over-acceptance on the other. Vices can therefore be identified as the opposites of virtues, but with the caveat that each virtue could have many different opposites, all distinct from each other.